Ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, welcome to Washington, D.C. and to the inaugural Balkans Forward Summit. I am delighted to open this conversation at a moment when the Western Balkans are no longer a footnote to Europe's future, but a frontline chapter in the global contest over security, democracy, and strategic alignment. This summit is about urgency, is about choice. The choice that the region itself, the United States and Europe indeed, whether the EU enlargement remains an abstract promise or becomes the geopolitical instrument that this moment demands. We meet at a time of war in Europe continent, of renewed great power competition, and of intensified pressure from aligned external actors who see instability not as a risk, but as an opportunity. And in that context, EU enlargement in the Western Balkans is not charity, not nostalgia, and not bureaucracy. I believe it is strategy. We have an exceptional panel and panelists that will help us discuss and unpack these issues. Allow me to welcome Her Excellency Elisa Spiropali, Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of Republic of Albania. Thank you for being here, Elisa.
Thank you, Ilva. Such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
With all of you.
Please allow me to welcome Ambassador Philip Ricker. Ambassador, thank you for being here, a partner and practice lead for Europe and Eurasia at Albright Stonebridge Group, distinguished fellow at Wilson Center, former ambassador to North Macedonia. It's a long list, assistant secretary for Europe and for Balkans. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Ilva.
As you have seen and you have noted in the official program, we had another panelist, Her Excellency Alexandra Papadopoulou, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Greece, that had kindly agreed to be in panel here today with us, but unfortunately she contracted a highly contagious influenza A virus, and she regrets not being able to attend today. But we want to wish her speedy recovery and also thank Greece for its role as a strategic stakeholder in the region. That said, I'm starting this conversation. We have roughly 25 minutes left, so I want to make a great use of our time. I'll start with a question for both of you, Minister and Ambassador, and I'll begin with security, because as we said earlier in our roundtable, enlargement is now about security. The Western Balkans sit at an intersection of unresolved regional tensions, democratic fragility, and intensified external pressures. My first question is, how do these security challenges change the urgency and the sequencing of EU enlargement? Is the risk today greater in moving too fast or in moving too slow? Minister.
Thank you, Ilva. And that question goes right to the point of what we are doing, but also what we are predicting for the future, and why the EU enlargement process is such a geostrategic tool that the EU should use for Albania and for all the countries in the Western Balkans. The Western Balkans are no longer a post-conflict zone or area, but they are a front line of European security and competition. So regional instability, Russian influence, hybrid pressure makes enlargement more urgent. And it makes enlargement not only a transformative process for our countries, but also a tool for a more safe, secure and prosperous Europe. So sequencing matters, and you mentioned sequencing, it does matter, because countries that demonstrate institutional resilience and alignment with EU values and standards should move faster. EU and NATO standards and values. That's what we believe, and that's what our stance is. Independently that we believe that all of the countries in the Western Balkans should move forward in their enlargement process, because a region in the EU, Western Balkans in the EU, is definitely safer, and there's more regional cooperation, and it's most prosperous at the end. Enlargement should be treated as a security instrument, absolutely, and not a bureaucratic reward mechanism. That has always been our stance. So, yes, a merit-based process, and we fully believe in that, because it has to be a credible process, but it also has to be a transformative process for our countries, our state, our societies, but merit-based and also time-based. So any prolongation, we feel, is a security risk. It has always been, but especially now, I think that has become even more pronounced. Delay creates strategic vacuum. We discussed about that earlier, and I don't want to repeat because maybe some of the people here were also at the previous meeting, but vacuum invites malign actors and influences, and that should be avoided at any cost. The question is no longer whether enlargement should proceed carefully, but whether the delays has become a security risk.
What's your reading, Ambassador?
Well, thanks, Ilva, and thanks to the Atlantic Council for doing this. I mean, I think Balkans Forward and this initiative really captures the spirit. We need to move forward, and it's high time. You talked about the Balkans no longer being a footnote. Well, if I look back at my career in diplomacy...
Don't tell me it was wishful thinking on my side.
The Balkans has really been not just the chapter head, but perhaps the title of the book, whether it was working with Ambassador Hill in Skopje in the 90s, in Kosovo at Rambouillet, whether it was ambassador to North Macedonia, whether it was Deputy Assistant Secretary traveling through the region, working on with Cathy Ashton and the EU on trying to resolve issues between Belgrade and Pristina. The Brussels Agreement was that, but you know, that was 12, 13 years ago, and it's high time to move this along. Not to dwell on the history, but you know, it's over 80 years ago that World War II ended, and under US leadership, we created a series of institutions globally, but particularly in Europe. One of the most important was NATO, but we also encouraged the losing countries, like Germany, and in Asia, Japan, to rebuild themselves, to reform, and to join these institutions that were so crucial to bringing stability, a greater sense of certainty, economic prosperity, and that's been a great success. The NATO alliance was a huge success. In the 90s, we were interrupted by the emergence of unsettled issues, the breakup of Yugoslavia, which Europe has had a much more difficult time dealing with than it has, frankly, the breakup of the Soviet Union. We can see the dangers of the Ukraine war and what's going on, but we had really difficult times in the 90s. Together, the United States and Europe determined in early 2000, a quarter century ago, that the solution to this was to take these countries, to help them make the necessary reforms, and to integrate them as democracies, multi-ethnic, into these critical institutions, NATO and the EU. Well, we worked on that path despite many hurdles, many of them thrown up by individual countries, to bring in countries that were prepared and that chose to become members of NATO. In North Macedonia, we overcame, for instance, the issue that was resolved by the Prespa Agreement, a huge step. And we made sure, by that time I was Assistant Secretary for Europe, that we moved quickly and responsibly to fulfill the pledge we'd made that when that issue was resolved, the country would move swiftly into NATO. They did that as the 30th member of NATO under President Trump's first administration. And now, of course, we see them stopped. The EU has been unable to move forward on that or any enlargement. These promises have gone on for too long. There's understandable skepticism, not just here in the halls of the Atlantic Council or ministries of foreign affairs or conferences around Europe, but there's skepticism among the peoples of this region about what their future is. We believe it is a European future. These are European countries, and they need to move along swiftly, promptly. It is an urgent matter of security, stability, and frankly, of trust in the West.
It looks that there is some move, especially on Albania as being a front-runner, but the momentum is fragile. Minister Spiropali, what factors you believe will determine whether Albania can convert that status of the front-runner into concrete accession progress?
Well, Ilva, they're connected, and they're connected at every single step, because for us, it is not begging at the door of the EU, it's not a bureaucratic reward mechanism, but for us, it's foremost irreversible reforms, irreversible institutional steps, not just ceremonial milestones. And maybe I can mention some. I don't want to go into the details of our reforms, but indicative of the substance from judicial independence that survives political pressure. Credible anti-corruption enforcement, alignment with EU foreign and security policy. So in general, institutional reforms that are embedded in our structures and are also accepted by the society. So Albania and Montenegro, you called us front runners, and we believe, yes, we can use that term, or we can say that we believe that reforms are embedded, not episodic. And we believe in sequencing because we truly believe that symbolic progress fades and what remains in institutional progress. And that's what we want to do. So real progress is when change in behavior also happens, when society is involved in these processes. So this is not only changing legislation, we're doing that now. The parliament is very busy. We are passing legislation aligned with the acquis, but the society should be involved more. So it's institutional change, it's strengths of institutions, it's also involvement of civil society, media, academia, young
domestic
people,
politics,
groups of interest,
also.
Everybody. This is a societal progress, and the real change really depends on this change also on of behavior that generates, not only generates headlines, but generates real change. We believe Albania has all the potential to respect the timeline that we've worked with the European Commission as well as with the member states to start closing clusters and chapters by 2026 and then 2027. One thing is opening of negotiations, clusters, chapters. The other thing is the interim benchmark assessment report of the EU, so that deals substantially with fundamentals, and that's our focus. Judicial independence, rule of law. So yes, to go back to your questions, these are real changes, and these are changes that are not episodic but compound.
You consider them sustainable?
Let me say, Ova, I think it's important to remember that this term front runner can be a very illusory one. I can recall over the past 25 years front runners who were different countries who found themselves then suddenly stopped. The front runner should be the European Union itself. Enlargement is important for the EU. The EU has discovered quite clearly after the Russian action in Ukraine, perhaps late, that they need to focus more on defense. Well, one of their first steps in defense should be to enlarge and integrate these relatively small countries, small populations that are clearly European, that are clearly geographically, historically, and culturally part of Europe. And they need to do that quickly, not worry about front runners, but look at all of them holistically and see how they can move them in and find ways out of their bureaucratic and rules-based process to allow what is really important for Europe as well as these countries, and I would say for the broader West as well.
And that's my question, Ambassador Riker. Why does EU accession for the Western Balkans matters to Washington in terms of priorities, NATO, cohesion, democratic resilience, etc.?
Look, countries being in the EU have benefited the United States. The EU was created largely to prevent wars, to prevent a reemergence of what we'd seen in the European continent for centuries, and it did that along with NATO very effectively for over 80 years. The Western Balkans was an area where unfinished business caused disruption. This wasn't good for the EU. These countries are just, some hours' drive from major European capitals. The gates of Vienna, historically, are still there, and they should be open to the Western Balkans as well. For Greece, it's very important. Geographically, Greece is the ultimate Balkan country, connecting Aegean and Adriatic in these important Mediterranean sea lanes. This is all important for security, and that is important to the United States. So when we sat down together at the turn of the millennium and said, this is the solution to dealing with these questions of the Western Balkans, it was, Europe will do this, we will will integrate these countries into these institutions. I would say we did our part, the United States, of which I am no longer an official representative, but I was, and we did our part in bringing the NATO candidate countries in. And it was an important time, and you've seen how important that was. The EU got stuck for a variety of reasons, and they need to unstick themselves and move ahead with this process so that we're not here again next year or 5 or 10 years from now saying, what about enlargement? Let's just get it done. It can be done. I know that it can be done.
From a U.S. perspective.
And a U.S. perspective, it's crucial to see this finished. And so we can spend the time at these conferences talking about what we can do together to deal with the real threats. EU will bring a certain level of stability, confidence, predictability to all of the countries of the Balkans. They'll have things to learn along the way, but that's part of the process of joining the club.
To take up on your idea or your proposal, your call, get it done. There is a latest controversial proposal of a two-speed enlargement, Minister Spiropoulos. I'm sure you have heard of it. There are two countries that have floated reforms that would allow leading candidates to advance more quickly, potentially breaking the cycle of inertia that has halted enlargement for years, as we are discussing here. The proposed idea of enlargement light, is this, in your view, a pragmatic solution, or does it risk deepening divisions within the region?
Well, two-speed enlargement, we believe, reflects, let's say, political realities inside the EU, not the abandonment of the region. That's how we see it. So if designed carefully, it can renew the trust and the reward seriousness in the process. It can restore credibility, some of the countries of enlargement, and it can reduce frustration among some reforming states. And I had here a few points about the actual proposal and what it meant, but this is not the place to go into that, but we can say in very few lines that it depends not only how we see it, but how they go about it. So for us, if for the Western Balkans, two-speed must mean accelerate for, I'm not using the term front runners here, but accelerate to reward reform, let's say, and it doesn't mean permanent waiting room for the others. It shouldn't be. So acceleration and permanent waiting room, no. It should be a process that only works when it's earned by reform and not frozen by politics. That's our stance on it, and I think maybe that was the original idea of why it was proposed.
I think it would show creativity. That's what diplomacy is all about, the ability to find solutions, to move forward. As I've long said to the countries of the region who want to be members of the European Union, you don't need to worry about having a commissioner or this or that. If there is a mechanism to bring you in a certain way, to adjust the rules and the very bureaucratic process that the EU goes through to add members, you should take that, because getting into the single market, being a part of the EU is the way to go. And you see many countries that are members, long-standing members of the EU, that may not belong to the Eurozone, that may opt out of certain other pieces. And this is just a creative form of that. But that step could happen very quickly. And they can find ways around letting single countries block something that is crucial, not only for the country that's blocking and their future, but for the whole European Union and for our Euro-Atlantic alliance. So I'm all for finding ways through that bureaucracy and moving ahead to do that.
Minister,
If I may, Ilva, about the question that you asked earlier about the US and EU, we believe it's also in the EU-US strategic interest, the enlargement process in the Western Balkans. And there are many reasons for that. So NATO coherence, more resilience, democratic resilience, and containment of malign influences, particularly Russia and China. So these two, I think, go together. For the United States, the enlargement is not charity. As for us, it's preventive strategy, it's strategic interest. And that's how we should see it, independently of the discussions going on now between the US and the EU. The Western Balkans could be the testing place for the coherence of the Euro-Atlantic alliance. And that is the point, I think, where they two come together.
And I think what we've always seen in the United States is that EU membership, enlargement, is not just important for the countries of the Western Balkans, it's important for the European Union. It's important for Europe. And when you talk about two speeds or different mechanisms, look at the discussion now, Ukraine. That's a great discussion to have. It's important. Some people see the solutions, the way to find stability and peace in Ukraine is to include a rapid enlargement. But what kind of message do the people of Ukraine take if they take a look at the people of North Macedonia who have been waiting 25 years and getting the same message? 2 generations in the Western Balkans have grown up and heard this message about Europe. They became members of NATO, their armed forces contribute, they add to security very effectively, they are important partners, and yet they're left waiting in this room for some unknown period, and you can imagine why people are skeptical. Why should Belgrade and Pristina continue to move forward and come to conclusions when they can see that others who make great sacrifices, take big decisions, existential steps, only find themselves still stuck through something else?
Maybe not get inspired by failure, and they can still advance their dialogue.
Also, if I may add, a credible enlargement process is the West's most effective, I think, long-term security guarantee.
And since we're
in the Western Balkans and in Europe.
Indeed. Is a geopolitical interest in the end of the day. But when preparing for this panel today, I looked at studies available because I wanted to see how much it will cost for an EU citizen enlargement. Do you have any idea how much it costs in the next 7 years if enlargement will happen for certain countries? Any guess? The net cost? Minister maybe knows it. It's 27.43 euros over 7 years for one citizen.
I've got my wallet, let me tell you.
It's 3.92 euros annually. What are you doing, Minister, to have this budget? It's 46.6 billion in the new MFF, multi-annual financial framework, to make sure that this amount of funds will be there to help the region get ready for the accession?
Well, it's good that you mentioned the funds, because there is a discussion now in the European Union and beyond, and with the public, that is not, it's not done enough. I think there needs to be more communication strategy, not only from the Western Balkan countries, but also with the member states about what enlargement means for them. What does it cost? Because that's the cost of a coffee, that's, the public needs to know that.
It depends where you get the coffee.
A couple of coffees, 2 or 3 coffees, right? Depending on when you take them. But this needs to be communicated. And if you see at the Eurobarometer, and we've been talking, with the Commission and with the member states about that, not enough is done to communicate the fact that the Western Balkans are not a burden to the EU. But they can contribute. They can contribute with security. They can contribute with their resources, with their people, with human resources. They are in strategic position. Well, Albania, for example, is between the Adriatic and the Aegean and the Black Sea, if you consider the whole Corridor 8. So investments, for example, like Corridor 8, that involve Italy, involve Albania, North Macedonia, Bulgaria, Romania, investments in infrastructure, in railways, in pipelines, NATO mobility, these are all of a much more value added than what's the cost
and these are
of
things
enlargement.
that the United States and this administration will take note of. These are things that the European Union can do to show they fulfilled their part of that bargain and how much this actually contributes to all of our security and economic opportunities.
Yeah, we are finishing right at the right time. Thank you, Minister Spiropali, Ambassador Rickard. Time flies when you talk about enlargement. This summit is called Balkans Forward Summit for a reason. The region has spent too long, as we discussed, being told to wait, to manage expectations, to accept ambiguity. Today's reality demands clarity, commitment, and courage, starting from the region itself, from Brussels and the US. Let me close by thanking the panelists for their insights, and all of you here in the room, and our global audience online, watching around the world, for being part of this vital conversation. Your engagement is what moves policy from intent to impact. Thank you, everyone.
Det var värst. Utan säkerhet.
We're live? There it is. Okay, thanks. Welcome, everyone, to the next panel of the Atlantic Council Europe Center's inaugural Balkans Forward Summit. Thank you all so much for being here for half-day panels on all things focused on the Western Balkans and the region's Euro-Atlantic future. My name is Damir Marušić. I'm at the Washington Post at the opinions section, and it's my pleasure to moderate this fireside chat on Bosnia and Herzegovina's transatlantic outlook and EU perspective with Željka Cvijanović, member of the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina. President Cvijanović, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome back to the United States. I'm glad that you're able to be here with us. The sanctions have been lifted, and we're all friends again. How are relations with
We
Washington?
have always been friends, regardless of that period. So,
But how
I can see that I don't have that privilege to have that big microphone.
None of us
so
do.
I just need to address you this. It's not only returning to the U.S. It was just a short break, but I'm also happy to be here in the Atlantic Council because it's been, I think, several years, since I was here last time, and I know that it's always good and productive discussion, So maybe this is new era for all of us, I don't know.
Yeah.
Definitely as for Europe, I can see, that there are some turmoils, that there is some unrest, situations like that. But also speaking about Bosnia as a whole, of course, that we have some expectations in this new era, I would say. And I come from Republika Srpska. This is where I'm elected, as a sub-member of the presidency. It is tripartite presidency, and it speaks by itself. If you have 3 members of presidency acting as collective chief of state, then it shows actually the essence of the country. It shows what the country looks like, So looks like complicated, but I'm also happy to be here, and I would say that I have had very productive and constructive week with a lot of important meetings here, trying to understand what's happening, what the future is going to look like. I just listened to previous, panel discussion here, and I heard this, front runner of front runners story. So, this is just not a joke, but I come from a country which is a backrunner, I don't know if I have put it in plural so that there are many countries, only one. But it's also interesting to see, what you mentioned here, European perspective and, how things stand in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely want to talk about the European perspective, but let's just talk a little bit about the United States. Watching the Trump administration, I think, policy in the Balkans, in many ways, we all focus on what's different, but there are a lot of continuities, quite frankly. And one of the continuities that I observe watching what's happening is I think, a real focus on getting, Russian influence out of the Balkans as much as possible. And I imagine that improving relations in general with Republika Srpska and the rest of this is a big part of it. One of the focuses is the building out of the southern interconnection LNG terminal to Croatia. I understand that's I believe a question for the Federation, not for any of the other entities. But my question to you is, overall, do you support and do you envision Bosnia moving away from Moscow? Are you ready to abandon the Russians and join Team America on that sense?
I haven't seen too many Russians, to be honest, but I've heard so many stories about Russians being present, But let's return to the US. I'm very happy, actually, that now there is a new approach, I would say, to Bosnia as a whole. And myself, coming from Republika Srpska, I have to say that I'm very happy with that approach. You mentioned one very important issue here. It is this southern interconnection, which means that the US finally, and first time ever, I would say, has this economic approach because they want to implement economic projects. And it's not only federation, currently they speak about the other entity, which is federation, that the project is going to be implemented. But on the other side, and this is one of my topics also when I discuss this with representatives of institutions, US institutions, is actually to see what we can do in order to have to replicate something like that in Republika Srpska, because we are also interested in having American investments there. And there are discussions about many other areas like infrastructure, energy as a whole in general. And I would say that I'm optimistic. But this new approach means also that the US now is now approaching all of us and putting all of us on equal terms. And I think this is something very good and very beneficial. And you mentioned sanctions, so many people in Republika Srpska, individuals, officials, politicians, people from institutions or institutional setup, and also businesses, they have been under, they were under sanctions, and I think it is a great move, actually, that the new US administration just, decided to lift all these sanctions, in one go. So, all of them just disappeared. That means that, there is a new day, and I think that all of us, need to, see the benefits of this new day. And we are very willing to work hard and closely with the US administration in order to see these economic benefits, but also political benefits, and also, of course, security benefits. And, we are very committed to that cooperation, and basically that's why I'm here.
Well, so again, you know, I'm sure my president wouldn't like me putting it this way, but we all know that Trump is a sort of a bit of a jealous mistress when it comes to these things. Again, to push you a little bit more, I mean, obviously cooperation, but I do believe that the focus of policy is, in fact, to, you know, really lock in the Balkans into the Western, you know, broader architecture. This has been U.S. policy for a very long time, and I think the Trump administration, as you said, a different approach to it, rather more transactional, but I think more pragmatic.
It is more pragmatic, you know, and we like to hear when President Trump says there's no more, like, you know, nation-building projects abroad, like, you know, because Bosnia is a project, is a nation-building project, definitely. And, you know, we have seen many experimental tools, like, you know, being applied, you know, in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So, and, you know, myself as belonging to a group of politicians who promote sovereignty and, you know, a democracy, real democracy, of course that I agree with this new approach, and, you know, I want to see our peoples, constituent peoples, and our entities, this is two entities actually Bosnia is composed of, that they really have true democratic life, which means that you don't have a foreigner or foreign bureaucrat who is going to impose legislation, who is going to sanction political parties, who is going to ban political parties from public funding, and similar things, who is not going to change election law on the very same election day, who is not going to oust your elected politicians and presidents from power. And this is something that we have experienced for 30 years or 28 years now, like, you know, because these so-called bomb powers were invented 2 years after Dayton, you know. So of course that I'm encouraged now to see this new approach. I think it is much more rational, like what we saw before, and I'm kind of, you know, encouraged that things are going to be better, like, you know, which means that our democratic institutions will be, like, you know, those answerable to people, that we go, like, you know, and test ourselves in elections. Then after that we have, like, you know, to take decisions and then bear responsibility for the decisions that we take. So, okay, this is kind of normal environment that I stand for, and this is something I hope for, like, you know, now with this new American approach, and I welcome that very much.
So the approach,
and, you know, to be honest, like, you know, I don't think that many of these, we can discuss Western Balkans, you know.
Yeah.
Now I cannot see that, you know, there are many people who follow closely what's happening in the Western Balkans. Of course, I understand
they're
there are
all
many,
in this room, basically.
but, you know, but there are many other, like, you know, important issues, or no. So I don't know if it is good or bad when it's only a few people actually following closely what's happening over there. But, you know, I remember, like, I'm old enough, you know, to remember that period that, you know, when there were too many people following closely what's happening there, it was messy.
Yeah.
So now I believe it's going to be less messy, like, you know, in the future. And I believe that actually all these nations and all these, like, you know, peoples who live there, that they deserve to have kind of decent future, that they deserve to have actually stability, that they deserve to have kind of platform for economic development, and of course, you cannot separate that from security. If there is no security, there is nothing. And one of the most important issues and things is actually that, you know, whatever we say about Bosnia and Herzegovina, whatever we say about that region, what's most important is actually that we have peace.
Sure. Well, so security, you know, on the focus of that, again, it's embedding Bosnia in Western institutions. How do you think about NATO, for example, as sort of
We have very good cooperation with NATO. Like, you know, there is a program of reforms signed, like, you know, several years ago. Every year we check actually our achievements on that ground, and I think that, you know, we are both happy with what we have achieved so far.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
but if you want to ask me about membership and other things,
we'll,
you know, so, you know, there's sort of divisive atmosphere when it comes to that issue, but no one is pressurizing us that we have to do this or that. And I think it's so important actually that we have mutual understanding, that there are reforms ongoing, and also that we have good interlocutors on the other side, so that we can really communicate our messages, you know, this way, and, you know, that there is this progress in cooperation.
And so I mean, you were alluding to in your previous answer about.
I'm a politician. I just like to jump in.
No, of course,
like,
no. It's fine.
Like,
I'm a journalist. I understand what this is, but it's.
I'm getting warm for the campaign. It's going to be like in 7 months' time.
The question is then, you know, you're talking about the Office of High Representative, basically, and I imagine this is part of your ask for reforms in this. Is the extent extent of the reforms that you're talking about, is it basically these kinds of things, like the Office of the High Representative that is either abolished or removed?
My position is
but again, just to even take it a little broader on this, because our time is short and I don't want to lose this. Mr. Dodik had statements recently, saying my main goal, an independent Republika Srpska, has not disappeared. We want to reach that goal through peaceful political process, using international timing being created. But then said, of course, that he's got 15
we have been
countries.
under this supervision for almost 30 years.
Yeah.
And as I said, now it's high time we kind of, change tune so that we become something else. And, it's high time that we have kind of, better next 30 years than what we had, as previous 30 years. So this is our position. And if we are going to continue to function as a colony, where you have foreign ruler, what would you expect from local politicians to say? Of course, that they want to have sovereignty, they want to have independence, they want to have freedom, they want to have full democracy, which means that if you're elected by people, then only people can remove you from office. It cannot be a foreigner, sorry, it cannot be a foreigner. This is what you mentioned, high representative. It is not part of a reforms package. It is prior issue. It is something which needs to be, resolved in advance, or is resolved in order to speak about, genuine reforms and other things, transformation of our society, modernization of our administration, and many other things actually people expect from us, but you cannot do that, Really, I feel bad. If I know that, there are elections, you go there, you run for office, you get elected, and then after that, there is some individual who never, got that right, or was never authorized by Dayton Agreement to do such things. So there is no society which can survive something like that. There's no society which can live forever under such conditions. So then, if you ask me, what's going to happen in the future, I'm asking, myself and all other, people who have relevant positions, so what is the future if we continue this way? There is no future. There is no future. If we say that Bosnia can live only because there is some foreigner who can kind of impose his will, regardless of what our constitution says, or if we can survive only if there are 3, can you believe, European judges in our constitutional court who can always create vote in majority bloc with whoever, usually this is what they do with Bosnia, judges. So what kind of country is that? So don't be kind of, surprised to hear whether it is President Dodik, whether it is someone else, there will be more people thinking this way. And already when you talk to citizens, you will see what they, you can check, what they think. If you're under pressure all the time, if you're under sanctions all the time, if, for instance, your constitution says this, and then in practice someone imposes, a completely different thing. Yeah. If the country was established by the Dayton Agreement as decentralized state, with 2 equal, 2 autonomous, highly autonomous entities, and 3 equal, constituent peoples, and what we have nowadays is completely different from what was actually what was signed in Dayton. So let's be realistic about that. There is future, there is possibility, and I believe that now it is this point in history where we need to not only turn a new page, but also to open completely new chapter. If we miss this opportunity, we will miss all other opportunities. This is what I know because I live there.
But let me just, again, clarify what I've heard you just say, and I'd like to just, nail it down. Local politicians like Mr. Dodik will say all sorts of things because they're under pressure for local politics because of what Dayton has set up. But ultimately, you see the future of some kind of federated Bosnia under a reformed Dayton, maybe without OHR, but nevertheless within the framework of a Bosnia, not an independent Republika Srpska.
It can be whatever we agree, which is good for all living in Bosnia. If it's good for one, then, okay, there is no business. There is nothing you can achieve. And it's not so you're trying to kind of, looking at that from different angle than what I do usually. So if you want to have country that is recognized and accepted by all, that means that all need to feel secure in that country. I don't think that Serbs feel secure in that country. Because, vast majority of Serbs vote in the way they vote, and they show their attitude to that because they don't want to be sanctioned, they don't want to be deprived of their rights, they don't want to lose their constitutional rights. Republika Srpska wants to enjoy its autonomy within Bosnia, which was given to it by the Dayton Agreement. And now we have twisted reality where Republika Srpska lost so many competencies that were removed from us, so our constitution says one thing, and what we have in reality is completely different thing. Of course there would be opposition to that. Of course, because we are mature people, we are educated people, we are politicians, we are responsible to give answers to our population. Why would I kind of, just accept that as something normal? So, okay, I'm encouraged that now there is new point in history where we need to get out of this, nation-building project, because it didn't create a kind of happier country. It did not create more this or that. It created more mess, and we need to get out of that mess. What way, we are going to decide to take, it depends on circumstances. It does not depend only on Republika Srpska. But I can speak on behalf of Republika Srpska.
It doesn't only depend on the Republika Srpska, but, a commitment to basically coming to some sort of agreement rather than...
Why not? Because Republika Srpska officials, including Mr. Dodik, whom you mentioned several times here, he was the one, promoting dialogue, inviting others to sit and together and see what we really need in that country and, to get rid of the things that we really do not need in that country. But there are no interlocutors. Because, why would our colleagues accept to communicate with us if they have foreigner who would impose, their will, not his will, So why would they discuss it? So, okay, let's be realistic. This is a very good period where we can have fresh start. Yeah. This fresh start means that everybody must feel secure, that everybody must feel kind of protected there, and everybody must feel that they have, full right to enjoy their constitutional rights.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, the final question is sort of the framework that we're talking about.
That means that you're not happy with the answers.
No. I'll connect it all. I'll connect it all. This is what I do. Listen. So I know. Look. So the question is then what the topics of this half-day event is also, relationships with Europe and European integration ultimately.
Europe is too slow.
No, I mean, just when you're talking about, foreigners imposing their will, I mean, ultimately, I think everyone in this room that's worked on European integration that understands that that is in fact an extra national body that imposes all sorts of things on the candidate country. I'm originally from Croatia. Exactly. No, I mean
it's a contradiction.
And so the question is then tell me a little bit about how you see the future of Bosnia, and what are the options here? Again, with just linking back to what we were talking about whatever kind of arrangement there is, and the Republika Srpska and what kind of entity. From my perspective, I would imagine there's no future for Republika Srpska in the European Union as an independent entity. It has to go in with Bosnia.
We have to see what the EU is doing nowadays and what's going to happen in the future. I'm very unhappy with what I have seen, in all these years when it comes to the approach of the EU. Now we're speaking about the Western Balkans, right? Western Balkans, all these countries in the Western Balkans, they first received all these promises, you have a European perspective, you have this or that, and this is something we were hearing for 20 years, And after that, okay, there were some movements. Without Ukraine and war in Ukraine, I mean, we would have never, become
You'll never get an argument from me on that.
The issue, so that someone would say, okay, now you have these and these, steps to take, and this is going to be okay. So I think that Europe is too burdened now, and you mentioned that, so they have security issues on the continent. But of course, it is natural. It is logical in a way, because we are part of the same continent. And, it was just previously mentioned during the first, panel here, I see that too, and I agree with people, participants, it is security project, yes, it is economic project, yes. But also, if you want to treat it really as a security project or economic project or something which will give benefits to all of us, first we have to understand, that, some of the rules need to change. If there is a need, to absorb more countries, and if you want to unite the continent in that way, then we have some expectations when it comes to the EU, to be stubborn and keep repeating, this is the condition you need to do, this is fulfilled, this is, the thing you need to do. Of course, no one wants to lower the standards, or no one expects them to lower the standards. Sorry, if there is new geopolitical situation, and if there are new conditions and circumstances, then you need to adapt, because, it is a political project also. It's not only economic and security, it is a political project as well. So why not actually follow political logic and do something, in politically tough or insecure times? So it depends on Europe too. It's not only, about our countries. It's not only about us. Sometimes I feel really, I don't know, helpless,
No,
helpless
but-
when I hear all these conditions and I know what's happening in, like, you know.
But Madam President, I mean, the thing is, I mean, you know, just as we wrap up here, I think that there's a real opportunity, and to just even take everything you've said, rather than ending on a note of helplessness, it's an opportunity for I think, you know, as we were saying, what Ukraine has done, and what quite frankly, the Trump administration has, I think, shocked Europe into a new reality of what's happening. There is momentum for all sorts of things, and so, you know, again, to you know, push you on this, Bosnia as a whole, future in Europe, yes?
Yeah, yes, but, you know, under certain conditions, you know, as I said, it does not depend on us only. Like, you know, if we understand that European path is not compatible with the existence of unelected foreigner who can impose legislation, then we are already, like, you know, moving forward. We have to understand it. So I expect from Europe to recognize that fact, and I expect from Europe to say, okay, this is not a process where we can have involvement of unelected, like, officials or bureaucrats, whoever, because it says exclusively, like, you know, that you need to have democratic institutions with democratic capacity to voluntarily pass legislation and adapt your system to the one they want to enter. So, okay, it is their rules. I did not invent it. It was the EU. Why not respecting them that, like, you know? So I think that, you know, I mean, there is this future, like European future, but we need to be realistic. It's not only us, like, you know, they need to be realistic too. And, you know, to stop trying to impose this centralization concept on us under the guise that, you know, the country is going to look more normal, and, you know, so there are many, or there are few or several, like, decentralized countries within the EU membership. What's wrong in, like, you know, then treating Bosnia as, you know, federal structure, decentralized state, like, you know, where you have to kind of combine efforts of the two entities and Bosnia level. It's not such a big deal if you want to have a rational approach.
Okay, well, I think we're out of time.
I give up.
Madam President. No. Listen, it was really good talking to you. And again, what I'm taking away from it, though, that there is a path forward that is constructive, and if all sides basically come to it that way, and we're at a moment there where that is perhaps realizable. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. That's all the time we have. Thanks for tuning in. We'll turn it over to our next session, a panel discussion on advancing regional economic integration in Europe.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Hello, welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. It's been a very interesting afternoon so far. And now you're dealing with me, Charles Litchfield from the Geoeconomics Centre. I've been very kindly invited by our friends at the Europe Centre to moderate this exciting panel on integrating the Western Balkans, integrating Southeastern Europe economically. So I have three very special panelists who are here to discuss this topic with me. We'll start with Afrim Gashi, who's the President of the Assembly of the Republic of North Macedonia. We also have Ambassador Justin Sibrel, who's President for Regions and Government Affairs at Bechtel, an energy firm. And then we will speak last but by no means least, to Jurida Tabaku, who's the chair of the Parliamentary Committee on Human Rights and Public Information at the Parliament of Albania. We will be taking questions, so do make sure you prepare some interesting, thought-provoking questions. We'll be going straight to the audience, and there will be a roving mic. So coming to you in about, I'd say, 20 minutes with questions. I do expect them to be interesting and thought-provoking, please. Starting with you, of course, Mr. Gashi, I thought I'd ask you, well, of course, generally what you think about regional integration, what the gaps are, but you've also recently spoken about North Macedonia as an anchor of stability in the region. So maybe you can share some of the success stories, what has made you an anchor of stability, and then a few thoughts on regional integration, especially from an economic perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Really, I appreciate, and I'm very thankful to you for organizing this discussion and this forum. I want also to say thank you to all the distinguished guests that are today here, and also my colleague panelists. Thank you also to you. When we are speaking about successful stories of Macedonia or North Macedonia, I would go back to maybe the beginning of 90s when wars in Yugoslavia started. We were the only country that remained without the war. So in that time, our first president of the country, Kiro Grigorov, named this country as an oasis of peace. So from that point to the 2018, when we signed Prespa agreement, when we changed the name from Macedonia to North Macedonia, we showed as a real example how one country can make big compromises for the sake, not just for its country and its citizens, but for the sake of the peace and stability for the whole region. So this is something, one point which I wanted to enhance and to start in the beginning. And I think between these 2 points from beginning of 90s and 2018, we made also Ohrid Agreement, which was one of the agreement which showed that one multi-ethnical country can change the constitution and can create coherence between two major ethnicities in the country, Albanians and Macedonians, but all the others. And from them, and here, now we are trying to build peace and stability within our country, but in the same time reflecting that peace and stability in the region, having zero problem with our neighbors from our side, and always or many times having disputes which were being raised by our neighbors. You know, the dispute between us and Greece, we solved that, and now Bulgaria with issues on identity, language and history and so on. But we think that this question cannot be obstacle for us to continue to develop our country, to continue to be the brightest point in the region, and to move forward and to be one of the most important countries in the region when we are speaking about peace and stability, and also in this context on regional economic cooperation.
Thank you. If I could just push you a little bit on the economic question and integrating with your neighbors. You are an EU accession country. You mentioned some of the concerns that your neighbors have that have held up your membership. Hopefully you do get to complete your membership and your accession soon enough. But short of that, what do you think the measures what measures do you think should be emphasized? What are the priorities you think that North Macedonia should have to integrate with EU members that are your neighbors and also non-EU members?
If we are speaking on criteria and merit-based system, I think that we would be part of the EU very, very sooner, and we would be speaking as a fully pledged member of EU. But because of the disputes and contests which been raised by our neighbors, we are still struggling with our accession to EU. However, we didn't stop here. We are still a very friendly country. We are trying to promote peace and stability, regional cooperation. And I can mention some concrete deeds and work. My gentleman sitting next to me is something that we can say what we are doing in reality, and not just speaking and being just on the level of empty words. So why I'm mentioning Mr. Former ambassador, because he is one of the main persons of Bechtel company, which are building Corridor 8, and that is connecting the Corridor 8 with many countries, from east to west, or from Ionian and Adriatic Sea to the Black Sea. And this is something that we are showing to the region that our doors are open. We will be open corridor for not just transporting the goods and people, but energetic and everything else.
Thanks so much. So, well, it's over to you, Ambassador Sibrel. He's already done some of your job, which is talking about connecting the region. So Bechtel is not just energy company. You're very present in the whole of Southeastern Europe, and you're working quite a lot on energy projects, on interconnectedness in the region. So over to you to tell us how you see those dynamics working out in the next few years.
Yes, thank you, Charles, and thanks to the Atlantic Council for hosting me today, and thanks you to my fellow panelists. For those that don't know, Bechtel, we're an engineering and construction company based here in the United States, actually not too far away in Reston, Virginia. We've been in business for 128 years, and we focus on sort of major industrial scale projects in energy, transportation, infrastructure, mining, government services, and advanced manufacturing. We run a global business, and we've been privileged to be working in the Western Balkans region since 1998, mostly in the construction of major motorway projects. We began in Croatia. We've been in Albania, Kosovo, Romania, and we're currently executing projects in Serbia, the Morava Corridor, and in North Macedonia, Corridor 8 and Corridor 10D. These projects have been responsive to government's desire for enabling infrastructure, I think, to enable economic development, to enable European integration. And we tend to get involved in this sort of long stretches of these corridors where there's a challenging topography, where you require sort of our international expertise. There's plenty of good engineering and construction companies locally that can take on some of the more sort of routine projects, but when they need to bring in an international contractor, we've had the privilege of working in a number of the countries in the region. And what we see is a tremendous ambition for connectivity, and for greater ease of communication. And I would say that's also an urgent necessity. Without that, you have communities that have decades of experience in manufacturing, but if goods can't get to market efficiently, you'll have labor migration and outward migration. And I think the governments realize that they need to increase the communication and connection between cities or between countries even to supercharge or to advance the economic development of the region. So our projects typically, respond to a government mandate for this purpose, and as I say, the best of those projects are ones in which we're able to connect countries. So Corridor 8, of course, as my fellow panelists mentioned, is an important corridor that ultimately terminates at the port of Durrës in Albania and then runs all the way to the Black Sea in Bulgaria. So that's a corridor that will also be a very important corridor for NATO transportation. And given that many of the countries along the route are new members of NATO, there's a great belief in the importance of providing that mobility. And if you look at the map and you look at that particular corridor, I think you'll understand implicitly the importance of that particular route, given what's happening in Eastern Europe currently in the Russia-Ukraine war. So we're very pleased to be in the region. It's not without its challenges, of course, but we've also, I have to say, found great receptivity to our efforts through some of the export credit agencies, namely the Export-Import Bank of the United States and UK Export Finance, the World Bank Group. So I think if you bring in creative finance solutions to these big infrastructure challenges, you can achieve some pretty significant advances. I guess the other thing I'd say on energy integration is the other important piece of this, and there's energy security, energy stability is a responsibility of governments all around the world, and not least in the Balkans region. There's also an effort to provide options for the countries apart from Russian gas. And of course, Russian gas is still the only available gas in places like Sarajevo. We've been working in the region to look at the opportunity to expand the diversity of energy solutions. And in particular, the advent of US LNG exports, either through Greece or through Croatia, offer opportunities for additional new energy corridors, which will, I think, be another focus for the region in the years to come. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to come back to some of the points you raised, some of the gaps that still remain, although the main thing I hear from your speech is a lot of ambition and some optimism, which is nice to hear. And finally, if we can go to you, Ms. Tabaku, you also have a high profile on, shall we say, the reform side, the fight against corruption, which enables economies to prosper. But given what you've already heard, you have the privilege of going last in a way, so you can respond to what your fellow panelists have said. Where do you see some of the gaps in regional integration? Where do you think we should be making more of an effort? Over to you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's a great opportunity. I also heard the first panel, and of course, we have been talking for the same. At least it looks to me like we have been talking for the same issues the last 15 years, and still the region is not yet a network. It's a patch. It's a patch in energy, in infrastructure, but also in economy. It's going to be very difficult for our countries to close some of the economic gaps. And the economic gaps are the real issue that the region has right now, but is also the real issue that is pushing migration, which is quite high in the region. I believe that this process, and now we are talking also about the gradual integration, we are talking about some of the substitutes of the European integration process per se, offers to the region a unique opportunity. Offers to the region the fact that we should offer clarity from our side, and the geostrategic clarity that the region has will be in the future one also should be considered also as an economic asset for the region, an economic asset to see the region as a hub for investments. This is why I consider all these European integration reforms needed for our countries right now, and specifically for Albania, as promoters for the business climate. I believe that, at least for Albania, the European integration process right now, where we are with all clusters being open and all chapters being opened, will finish in at least 30 years. But we don't have the luxury in finishing this process in 30 years. The Albanian government has asked for at least 15 intermediate periods of time. We know that will never be, at least in infrastructure, with EU standards. We know that will not be in energy, but we need these investments to happen now. We needed them to happen yesterday. This is why I believe that a coordinated strategy in the region in terms of investment for business climate, firstly, and then infrastructure and energy is really needed. The gradual integration is helping in this, but the real process per se, the European integration process per se, I believe should be much more an all-inclusive one than a process that for the moment is happening a lot on paper, but not in reality.
So infrastructure investments in general as a sort of means and a motor to accelerate your accession, I understand that point. But for the investments to be made, you need to attract investors. So when you have conversations with them and try to convince them, this will be a question for you first, Eureka, but then I'll come to some of our other panelists. But what are some of the hurdles that you encounter when you're trying to convince investors?
We have people in the room who know very well here the problems that investors have in Albania, but I'm going to stop in a few of them. Building strong institutions is one of those. Several of the foreign investors who come to Albania face weak institutions that lead to corruption, that lead to property issues, that lead to legislation that is being very difficult to implement on the ground. Right now, what it's needed for Albania is a business readiness analysis, but also a business readiness understanding of what are the reforms needed for the European integration process. There is a huge amount of legislation that is being approved right now, but businesses, first of all, need to have an evaluation of cost and benefits, and secondly, to see how they can implement those. This process is not just a checklist. This process is real implementation on the ground. We have been discussing in the last year with the American Chamber of Commerce, and most probably Grant will jump on this, on legislation on screening of foreign direct investments. What kind of investors should Albania attract? What kind of investments we want? Because this will also bring the culture in the country, but they also lead to much more credible Western investments other than third parts, which, of course...
I was going to ask you that question, if you allow me to interrupt. I mean, in some countries, they claim that their investment frameworks are country agnostic and merely to do with the nature of the investment itself. But you seem to be hinting that there is a preference, or at least you have a personal preference for Western investors over investors from Asia, maybe. So how far do you think investment screening should go?
There are other examples in the region. There is an example from the United States which we are looking at. I believe in free market. I believe in competition. I don't believe in legislation that should stop investors from coming to the country. But we need to know who invests in the critical infrastructure, who invests in industry, who invests in energy. And we need to make sure that this will be followed by also a business culture. This will be followed also by other investments in human resources. We need to know that this will also result in future investments and not being used for reasons which do not go in line with our, first of all, NATO alliance, but also our purposes in the European integration process. So yes, Western maybe.
Thank you. Very clear. Afrim, could we have you on these topics? Attracting investors and the hurdles that you encounter when trying to convince them.
Before coming to that topic, we have to see and to consider once again political background of the region. So all we know that without shaping our policies and having a clear position of all countries of Western Balkans, what we want to do with us, and all together, we cannot move forward on a developing country and also enhancing the economic and regional cooperation. That's why I have to say that from my perspective, I think that all the 6 countries of the Western Balkan region, we have a thesis that we should work and we should live in with the values of state of law, with the values which has produced and which lives Europe and United States, for example. But we want to start to implement them when we will be part of the EU, not today. So I think that we have to shift this
mentality,
primarily in our mindset. So we know that without political background, we cannot move forward. That's why I think that each country, each political party or all the important stakeholders of the Balkans, we should decide for ourselves that we have to change our mindset. We have to implement state of law because of our citizens, not because of the Brussels and because of the integration. And we started this race to be part of the EU mostly to be first in the race and to block the others. So the atmosphere is not sincere at all. That's why I think we have to go back to main principles. What we want to do with our countries and with our neighborhood. Another problem which is connected by infrastructure problems is that if you see capitals of the Balkans, Skopje, Belgrade, Pristina, Tirana, Sofia, Athens, or maybe Thessaloniki, we are all, Podgorica, Sarajevo also, we are all around 300, 400 kilometers. But traveling to these cities from Skopje to Sarajevo, it takes 8 and 10 hours. So we have to bring people closer by highways, by railways. They have to meet each other. They have to know each other. They have to break prejudices that we have, which we know that our history is full of these prejudices and conflicts and hatred between each other. So exchanging people, culture, music, trade, I think that now we have to change the game. If we tried with politics and it didn't work, I think that now economy and culture, people should be leaders of this project of regional cooperation. And we will start to think as a real Europeans from today, from now, from myself. Not to wait some from Brussels to accept us and to acknowledge us that, yes, you receive the medal, you are part of the EU.
That's
so
one
I
thing
think
I
that maybe it's the question is more philosophical than it's economical and political.
Okay, well, one practical question, if I may. So you mentioned the need for people to be engaged in improvement of institutions and it not just being part of a box-ticking exercise for Brussels. Well, so that leads to this very practical question on how you feel your electorate relates to these processes. The previous panel, but one, featuring former ambassador to the region and was moderated by my friend Ilva, they mentioned this question of impatience, things that are going too slowly, and this starting to affect public opinion, and even a sense that we will never quite make it. And then you also mentioned it, Mr. Baku, this sense that it's going to take much too long at this point, and there's a feeling that at this point the incentives aren't as strong anymore. So if we're going to reframe what these incentives are and just think about addressing the people in your country and telling them and convincing them that the need for improved institutions is something that serves them, do you think that's even possible, given there's a loss of optimism?
I would use quote of Albert Einstein to answer this. When he says doing same thing and expecting different result is insanity. So we should accept that the way how we tried to do this till now didn't work. We had summit of Thessaloniki in 2003 for integration of the region on EU. We're speaking about all the region. And now we are in the 2026 and we are still speaking about opening chapter, closing chapter, blocking each other, opening identity issues, historical issues. We cannot agree on opening railways between Macedonia and Bulgaria. We needed 3 years to start that process and so on and so on. So changing a mindset is a key point on this issue. So now maybe for decades and centuries, we were enemy to each other. Now our enemy is time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Maybe, Ambassador Sibrel, you could make me a little more optimistic after what Mr. Gashi was saying. I mean, you've already very engaged in some really cool infrastructure projects. Highway 8 has already been mentioned, but is there anything else that you can, well, pardon the pun, but talk about in the pipeline that you think might be favorable for these people-to-people ties? I'm getting a bit gloomy after what I've just heard, so maybe you can make us more optimistic.
Well, if it was easy, we wouldn't be there. I think it's pretty hard, honestly. And we have some ambassadors in the audience, Ambassador Hill here, who would know some of the challenges that we face on these projects. Just on the issue of laws and attracting investment. I mean, we're not per se an investor, we're an operator, a contractor, but we do invest insofar as we bring our resources into the country. We build a workforce, which we acquire hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars of equipment. We run a large-scale operation. I think our workforce on Morava got up to 4,000 people at one time. It's a massive operation that has a big impact, of course, on the economy. And so therefore, we also care about the operating environment and the laws that enable us to operate. And I'll tell you, they're not fit for purpose, typically. We build linear infrastructure, so we're talking roadways that pass through various provinces, and you need to ensure that the expropriation system can function properly. You may need to look at the mining laws. Are you able to source the rock that you need to crush to build the road? You need to look at the forestry law. Are you allowed to cut down the trees? You need to look at the labor law. Are people allowed to work more than 40 hours a week? What are the provisions for overtime? I mean, as an example, we faced this in Serbia. I think the law restricted people to work at 60 hours. It was a cap. So even in the summer months when the weather is good and people want to work more than 60 hours a week, they're not allowed to per se under the law. So imagine if you're trying to attract Serbian workforce to come back to the country from Germany, from Austria, from elsewhere in Europe to work on the project, and they'd like to come back and be closer to their families, but if they are limited in the amount of hours they can work, even in those summer months, they're not going to be attracted. So we usually go through cataloging all of the laws that would affect our project and systematically run through the changes that must be made, frankly, for us to come in and operate in the country. In the case of the government of North Macedonia, there was an understanding and we had a special law that actually addressed the project, and that enabled us to move forward on that very important project. But by no means are the laws currently fit for purpose, I would agree, in a number of the countries, and they need to be looked at.
Thank you. I'm not sure 60-hour weeks would put them in conformity with the EU's Working Time Directive, and we are still hoping that they find a path into the EU. So we have a question in the fourth row with you, sir. Please do introduce yourself. A microphone is coming, and please make sure your question is brief.
The question will be brief. I just want to do a 45-second context for my question I have. The question is for Mr. Afrim Gashi.
Would you mind introducing yourself, sir?
Yeah, my name is Philip Bay. I'm the CEO and founder of Washington Global Advisors. I've been in the Balkans for over 30 years. I know your country a long, long time ago when it was part of Yugoslavia. And I was also there as the founder of AmCham. Many, I'm giving away my age. I have a very specific question, and it's based on creative diplomacy. I am not a diplomat. But there's one elephant in the room that we're not talking about when it comes to EU enlargement and these countries that wish to be a member of the EU. And that is, everybody who became a member of the EU from the Balkans had a daddy, had a big brother. Nobody likes to talk about that. And I'll give you an example. The Hrvatska Republic would never be a member of the European Union if it wasn't for Deutschland. You can debate that until you're blue in the face. That's the fact. Romania had a lot of assistance from France. Bulgaria had assistance from several, but Bulgaria did something specific during the war in Yugoslavia and Kosovo that granted them permission to become members. You have no big brother. You have no daddy in Northern Macedonia. But if you look forward, instead of looking backwards, you might have a daddy. And that's the country that you're squabbling with. But you have great relations with them at the end of the day, and that's Bulgaria. If maybe the current government could put behind whose statue is Macedonian and whose statue is Bulgarian in Skopje, and move forward and really ask for assistance and look forward, I guarantee you the Bulgarians will drop a lot of their requirements, and they would be a great coach for you and maybe your future daddy to get into the EU. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go to Mr. Gashi on this daddy question, but then I also want to ask who Albania's daddy is next. But to you first.
You said that you are not diplomat, but the question was very diplomatic. When I just said previously, I said that the rules of the game are not equal. So why we should have big brother or daddy? My idea when I was thinking about changing the mindset is being all brothers and sisters. So I think that we don't need one big brother. I think that we should be all brothers and sisters in the region. We should move forward all together. We are too small to be divided. That's why I think that just being united, just acting like brothers, and we should move forward and be important for EU and not just for EU, United States and all the region. This is my approach. This is how I think that it would be better for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Quickly to you, Yurida, can you think of a specific champion that Albania might have within the EU? A particular capital that you've invested in? Well, for now, current members. You don't have to answer the question, but I thought it'd be fair to.
I can. We like to be friends with everyone, though. Right. We never say a bad word about anyone. But Italy has been supporting the European integration also because of traditional links of Albanian community there. The biggest support, though, has been given by Germany. Germany has started the process. Germany was the one who started the first meeting in Albania. Germany was the one who also personally, Chancellor Merkel at the time, personally vouched for all of our countries.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Deborah.
Hi, I'm really glad you raised transportation, and I am a senior advisor here who works mostly on military and security issues. And I hate to sound like this broken record, but I think of Ukraine, and I think the difficulties of moving personnel and military equipment into Ukraine. I had this discussion with a number of senior officials from Finland, the Baltic countries, and others last week about how the rail gauges are still geared toward Russia and not toward Western Europe. So what if something happens where you have to move military equipment and personnel across the Balkans and you have no form of transportation that works efficiently and quickly? And what is difficult for me to understand is how quickly countries move to change their energy profiles, to have better interconnectors, better port facilities and the like, but not being done on basic rail transit, which would can be the difference between life and death during a security situation.
We'll go to Ambassador Sibrel first, if you're willing to answer.
It's certainly a need. I mean, the region is lacking in critical connections, and not least in those NATO corridors. Corridor 8 is a designated NATO corridor from Durrës to the Black Sea, and that's not complete. So you would not be able to move much personnel or equipment across that corridor currently. It does take an integrated approach and understanding and probably financing. I think probably NATO could itself get a bit more assertive, frankly, about helping the countries plan that out and construct those motorways. I mean, Corridor 8 is particularly challenging because it's near Ohrid and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and there's a lot of complexity in and around that location, and going through the mountain, it's costly. The countries are limited, the amount of money debt they can take on, as an example, to invest in this infrastructure, so they need assistance, probably in finance. The rail infrastructure, some countries are trying to address it. North Macedonia is among those. There is a plan the Deputy Prime Minister has laid out, which is to upgrade the rail corridor. I think they're working with the UK in particular on that. But it is a bit piecemeal and spotty, and there isn't a consensus across the region. So I would just agree with the comment that it's an urgent need, and probably needs someone to really be bringing the countries together, to address it.
I think I'm going to take in one more question, if that's okay, just so we can, both of you have a chance to respond, but feel free to respond to Deborah's question as well when you next have the mic. We'll take two, actually. We'll go to you, sir, with the red tie, and then the gentleman just behind you.
Hi there, my name is Samet Shabani. I'm from Atlas Think, US-based think tank, covering mostly relations between Western Balkans and Turkey. So my personal focus is on relations between Western Balkans and Turkey. And Mr. Gashi, you mentioned that basically we should change our mindset. And first question is, what is stopping you for changing that mindset? And especially in the last 1 decade, we see enormous interest of Turkish companies in Western Balkans, especially in the energy sector, and many observations from the field, and even my personal witnesses, shows that there are sophisticated schemes of corruption ongoing on that side. And now we are speaking about, and you also mentioned that the country is ready to join, but the neighbor is stopping us, etc. But the report on European Commission says the opposite, that actually there is no any improvement in Chapter 23 and Chapter 24 especially, as the pillars of this enlargement process, of the integration process. So I was wondering how can you break this vicious circle of corruption, not just in our country, but also in the region? Thank you.
Thank you. So this was a direct question to you. We'll have your answer, and then we'll go straight to the gentleman for a last question. Thank you.
Okay, it wasn't just one question, but I will try to answer. The first one, I'm speaking that we should change our mindset. Nothing is stopping us, but we cannot find the button to push it. So it's not just like easy to push a button and to change mindset. So we know that we lived in the different system for decades, and we are still in the process of transition. We transited in the legal way. All these countries are democratic and so on, but if you go and dig deep inside, you will see that there are still many things that the way of thinking, way of doing things are connected with the previous political system. So that is one perspective. The second perspective about who is right about why we are not in EU. You know, we have to be self-critics. We are not saying that we did everything. So we have many things to do. Our notebook for homework is full of things to solve it. And all the people who live in the Balkans, they know that we have to deal the country, the state, with the crime and corruption. Living in the state of law would be a precondition to move forward and to functionalize and to change that mindset.
Thank you.
But,
we do want to get the one last question in. But
just one sentence, please.
one sentence.
But we have to say that if it wouldn't be these identity issues which blocked us for decades, I'm sure that today we would be speaking from a different position, and we would be totally in a very advanced phase of fighting crime and corruption, being state of law, and being more developed economically and connected more with all the countries of the region.
Yeah, that was one sentence, but with several subordinate clauses. Sir, over to you. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Thank you.
If you give the mic to the politicians, that happens.
Over to you.
All right, thank you. My name is Mark Plavetic. I am the national coordinator of the National Federation of Croatian Americans. And I've been doing a lot of research focusing on Bosnia and Herzegovina and also the Croatian diaspora there, and also interlinking with Croatian relations and energy in the region as well. And I have a question for the ambassador there. So what relation do you see with Bechtel and AAFS infrastructure will play in the southern interconnection pipeline between Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia? And who will help finance for that pipeline that will help with the integration in the European integration in the region?
Thank you. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's an interesting project. It's one that's been supported by the U.S. government in the first Trump administration, through the Biden administration, and now the second Trump administration. This is a pipeline that would deliver liquefied natural gas, some of it exported from the United States through the terminal at Kirk in Croatia. So the trunk line through Croatia into Bosnia, and then into Sarajevo, with also spurs to Mostar and other places. We've looked at the project. We think it's very interesting, and we had meetings in Zagreb, excuse me, in Sarajevo recently, and you know, it's a project we think is definitely financeable. I mean, it's a revenue-generating asset. You know, it's a pipeline. There is so the financing, I don't think, is an issue. The engineering isn't particularly an issue. It will be an issue politically and domestically, and how they decide to carry that forward. So we're interested, but you know, we'll see if we can make it work with the government. There seems to be a real intent, but it's complex, and we have not had the privilege yet of working in Bosnia. We've worked in most of the countries around, so this would be a great one to start with. But you know, we'll see.
Thanks so much, Mr. Baku. If I could go back to you for 30 seconds, 1 minute, on some closing remarks, ideas that you've had while listening to your fellow panelists, and then I'm afraid we'll have to wrap it up.
Thank you. First of all, let me say that this process, the European integration process, and since we mentioned the word forward several times here, it is something that it's painful, but we have to go through it. We have to move forward. The region does not have any other choice. I know that sometimes there are a lot of costs for communities, for businesses, but this is the biggest state building reform that our countries are going to do, and we have to do it now. I know that we are very good at complaining, sometimes too much, but the time to do the reforms, the time to change the country, the time to close economic gaps, the time to also close gaps in infrastructure and energy is now. The region has lost the last 10 to 12 years, and I believe that with this commission, which is very pro-enlargement, we have a unique opportunity which we should not lose.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your participation. Thanks to all three of you, in fact. Before we applaud them, I encourage you to stay, because just after this conversation, there'll be a panel on future US policy in the Balkans, and then a very exciting conversation with Jakov Milatovic, His Excellency Jakov Milatovic. So please do stay for both of those things, and I look forward to seeing some of you at the reception later on. Thank you for participating. Thank you.
So this session is another part of the Atlantic Council Europe Center inaugural Balkans Forward Summit. So thank you all for being here for this half day of panels on all things focused on the Western Balkans and the region's Euro-Atlantic future. I'm James Rice. I worked in the US Senate for 25 years and am now pursuing my PhD. And it's my honor to be here to moderate this panel on the future of US engagement in the Western Balkans, with a group of highly experienced voices on the region and U.S. policy toward the region from different angles. So we have Ambassador Jonathan Moore, who's a non-resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's Europe Center, and a career U.S. diplomat who has served as ambassador and head of the OSCE mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And then we have Ambassador Chris Hill, who's now a distinguished fellow with the Atlantic Council's Europe Center and a former 5-time ambassador, including most recently to Serbia. And then we have Tresa Gainov, Director of Programs and Operations and Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, and a former Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs, where she was responsible for the Balkans, amongst other regions. So this is about U.S. policy toward the Balkans. In the first Trump administration, President Trump appointed Rick Grinnell to be a special envoy for the Serbia and Kosovo negotiations, so was very engaged, at least in the region. This Trump administration, there are 0 ambassadors currently pending nomination for any of the Western Balkan countries, so those ambassadorships are still open and don't have anybody on deck. And we have a national security strategy that talks a lot about disengaging with Europe. On the other hand, I have to point out, coming from a career in Congress, that the 2025 National Defense Authorization Act that was recently passed Congress includes the Western Balkans Democracy and Prosperity Act, which provides the administration a roadmap for serious engagement in the Western Balkans using carrots and sticks in the form of economic development and sanctions. So what do you make of the current direction of U.S. policy toward the Western Balkans? Where do you think it's going, and what adjustments would you advise? We'll just go down the line.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here with you. Looking forward to questions if there's time for that. And thank you for moderating. In terms of current policy towards the Western Balkans, from my perspective, which may not be shared by anyone else either on the panel or in the room, I think there are some major changes to pay attention to. The general context can be described a variety of ways, depending on your partisan leanings or other beliefs. But a bottom line is, what are you doing? What are you bringing to the table? What contributions are you making? And are you avoiding or ending conflict? So the idea of a threatened new conflict is not attractive to anybody in U.S. policy, whether in the White House, the State Department, the rest of the executive branch, or for that matter, on Capitol Hill. Thank you for your service to the Senate. What are you bringing to the table? What solutions are you bringing? What ideas do you have? You may have frustrations, you may have needs, you may have concerns. But I think for the region in particular, and while the context was set with respect to the Dayton Agreement and an event in early 2025, marking, as so many events did in 2025, the 30th anniversary of this, that, and the other thing, a bit of a distraction at the end of the day, but important accomplishments that they were and should be celebrated. When Deputy Secretary of State Chris Landau made statements saying, we're not interested in nation building, we're not interested in doing your jobs, you need to do your own job. Meaning, of course, elected political leaders need to take on the responsibility. There are some countries, we've heard a lot from people from Albania, that has had a very good example under multiple prime ministers of stepping forward, of getting things done, of participating as a responsible member of NATO. That unfortunately is not true for every country in the region in terms of stepping forward and getting things done, but rather saying, we can't do it, we've got this problem, we don't like this faction, we don't like this ethnic group, we don't like this religious group, so you need to solve our problems for us, international community, or Washington, or Brussels, or whomever else. I think an indication of this would be with respect to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Earlier, the Serb member of the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Željko Cvijanović, was here, as was noted, a person who was under sanctions until recently. Why did those sanctions go away? Because of a variety of reasons that can be debated, but the bottom line was a recognition that to get things done in Bosnia and Herzegovina, you can't just shut down 1/3 of the country. There are very few stools or tables, if they have 3 legs, would continue to stand when they only have 2. And this was a message, again, from the top of the administration on that occasion in Dayton, hosted by Congressman Turner, who, of course, was the mayor of Dayton at the time in 1995, to say, look, take on this responsibility, find a way to work things out. And that is a message not just to the people who had been under sanctions, but also a message to the Bosniaks and the Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina about what contributions they need to make, what a difference they can make. And this example then extends to other countries. Albania has stood ahead for what it's done on its own. And I don't want to get into direct comparisons, but there are places like Kosovo that could do so much more than it's done. The message can't be to Washington, certainly not to this administration, you need to do our job for us. People need to step up. They've been democratically elected. The pressure should be on those countries to deliver, to bring good ideas to Washington. By the way, that's not all coming to Washington and saying, please invest in us, because it doesn't really work that way. But we have this project, we have this need. We had an excellent presentation by Justin Siberl with regard to what Bechtel does. There are a lot of US companies that would be pleased to be included and involved in infrastructure and other projects to bring their expertise as partners with countries throughout the Western Balkans, and of course a broader scope than that. There are multiple ways to bring something positive to the table, end the conflict, come up with a new perspective, have elected leaders actually do their jobs instead of complaining that they can't. That would impress this administration. I think it would impress the Hill, and it would show more positive momentum.
Go ahead. Okay. So the task is to say what this administration is going to do with the Balkans, and then
how do you see it going, and is there something you would do differently?
Because I have no idea what they're going to do in the Balkans, but I'm going to do my best here. First of all, over the years, I think the effort to work with the EU and make these countries sort of groomed up to be EU members has been a joint effort between the US and the Europeans. I'm not sure that aspect of it is going to be the same. Mind you, I think a European future is where all these countries not only have to go, but they will go there. But I'm not sure we're going to see a lot of US effort in that. Secondly, I think we're going to see kind of less patience from the US for these countries in how they have problems with their neighbors. Now, I find that kind of therapeutic, actually, because, you know, you go back to the 19th century, and I think what the Balkan states learned when they went to the Treaty of Berlin, for example, Congress of Berlin in 1878, was basically they learned the lesson, don't work with each other, and if anything, just tattletale on each other. And that's been going on really for a long time. And my sense here with the new administration is there'll be less interest in hearing, you know, how he hit you on the playground. They're going to be saying, you work it out with him on the playground. So that may not be the worst thing in terms of developing a, you know, a kind of the self-confidence I think these countries need to have. My own feeling is, since I doubt this administration is going to be proponents of getting into the European Union, we might get away with something where the Balkans, where the focus will shift not so much to the membership question, but rather to the single market question. And I can imagine this administration under the National Security Advisor / Secretary of State / AID Director Marco Rubio might be inclined to say, well, you know, we certainly want more market-oriented countries, so we support their aspiration to have the single market. So I hope we can see that, coming forward. My own view, too, is that since the EU is, we're not going to see a lot of working cooperation with the EU, we might see more effort to work with the militaries of these countries. And that, I think, would be a very positive step. See, I'm an optimist by training. So maybe that could come about. And we also know that the administration is very interested in business issues. And so the extent to which these countries can work together, when you come to Washington and talk about some great business interest in a country that has 2 million people, there's just not a lot of interest. But I think if you could show that you're working region-wide and you have a big energy corridor that you're working on, whether you call it the vertical corridor, I think you can get people's interest. And we're seeing a little of that now. And so I think the message to these countries should be work together. And when someone asks you in Washington, how are you doing with country X, the answer should be, we're doing fine with country X. That is, this idea that people can't work together is just, people don't want to hear it anymore. So I think if you add that up, now, I have a preference for having a few diplomats in the region. I'm a little concerned there. What do we have, 0 ambassadors there? That has to be fixed, but I think that will be. And I think it'll probably come about with, people who kind of know what they're doing. I love my time. And I opened the embassy in Tirana in 1991. I loved it then. I was in Skopje, and it was 1996. I loved it. I think these are great posts. But not everyone who's contributed to a political campaign in the US is dying to go to Skopje. So I think you might see a prospect of getting some career ambassadors back, because it's hard to do diplomacy without diplomats. And I think ultimately these countries are going to have to take a lot of responsibility for working together, for making joint proposals. I was at Exim Bank yesterday, and I think there's a real interest in working directly with these countries. And I think if these countries, come up with, whether it's the last panel was talking about pipelines that involved Croatia and Serbia, I think this administration will be very interested in that. I also think the administration will be interested in projects that reduce Russian or Chinese, although China and Serbia was about building bridges or roads. But Russia and Serbia is just making trouble. And I think to the extent that Serbia can partner with others on refineries and things like that, this administration is going to be very, very interested in that. So, I think America always does the right thing after we've exhausted all the other possibilities, so that's kind of in our DNA. But I really do think there will be an understanding that we got to focus on economics, focus on the countries directly. Lo and behold, maybe the Secretary of State will make a visit there. People in the Balkans, like people everywhere, they love to be loved. And if you give a little of that, it can go a long way. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think looking in 2026, there's a huge imperative on Europe from a security perspective, particularly when it comes to the Western Balkans. But I'll set that aside for right now, because we were talking about the U.S. perspective, and so I have to bring up the NSS, National Security Strategy, and then the National Defense Strategy, because That's what I used to spend my time doing. And you're not going to find much in either of those documents that speaks to, the U.S. perspective on the Western Balkans, or, anything that's going to kind of give us, a sense of what kind of strategy is there, because I don't really think there is one right now in terms of a full U.S. strategy towards the Balkans, but definitely not the Western Balkans. And of course, these documents have emphasized transactionalism, sovereignty, and particularly putting pressure on Europe from kind of a cultural perspective. So, that structure is not going to be coming from this administration anytime soon. So going the next level down, on the mill-to-mill side, as the ambassador mentioned, I still think there's a lot there, and there always has been, right? But there's some uncertainty for 2026 that I think could, that's going to affect how the United States continues to work in the Balkans, but particularly the Western Balkans, because we can distinguish between the NATO and non-NATO countries and so forth. The U.S. ability to deploy to the region still is the unparalleled ability on the continent, right? And I think the the Pentagon, the Department of War, has given indications on a number of fronts that, the command structure could change. We'll see if that does. That the U.S. force posture in Europe could change, and we'll see if that does. And those will affect some of the mill-to-mill relationships across the board, but definitely in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and also just in the region. I think that'll be important to watch. EUCOM has an amazing set of things that they have done in the past. The military exercises, the partnerships on training, and I hope that these can still continue under the radar screen to some degree without a lot of fanfare, and I think there's support in Congress for that as well. The state partnership programs, for instance, which are cherished in the region, those are something that I hope that this Pentagon will continue to support, regardless of kind of the broader strategic context. I think that there isn't, from what I can understand, a lot of thinking about the contingencies for some kind of conflagration, though, and that does worry me. The planning. I don't know what kind of planning that's going on in EUCOM, and certainly at the NATO level, which is a separate level, but within the Department of Defense, and the Department of War. It's not clear what kind of thinking is going on there, and so that's going to continue to be an area of focus, I think, for 2026, to see how all of these factors related to U.S. military presence in Europe and its general posture as it continues to pressure Europe on defense spending and other things are going to affect the Balkans. Now, of course, we've talked about the defense industrial base piece, and I think that has a lot of, of interest, and that will continue to have a lot of interest in the Pentagon. Whether there'll be an organized effort around it, I don't know. Of course, I think there are some 200 defense-related companies in the Balkans, and most of them are in Serbia, but there are plenty in BIH and other places. All the major NATO, countries in the Balkans are committing themselves to 2%, and some will get up to 2.5 and even 3%, I think, Montenegro by 2027. So they'll be part of this push. Whether it'll be enough to make the administration happy, because it's going to be slower. They're starting from a lower percentage almost across the board, usually around 2%. So that's something I think that'll be an important thing. And hopefully they'll be getting encouragement in 2026, from the Pentagon and from the State Department. But there really aren't any champions there that I see right now for the region, and so that's something that that paucity of leadership and commitment on the Balkans will potentially leave potentially more space on the mill-to-mill side, to be honest, but we will see. And I think the type of spending that goes on will be important. ISR, I know Albania's focused on ISR, they're focused on UAVs and cyber. All those things are really good, but it's going to take a lot to get to the higher percentage of defense spending. And so whether there's a U.S. strategy on that side, I don't know, but those are like the key factors that I see from a kind of a defense, U.S. defense perspective on the landscape for the Balkans for 26?
I could tell you on the state partnership program, Iowa cherishes its relationship with Kosovo. Yes. It has turned into a full state-to-state. They have a consulate in Des Moines, so Iowa's not going to let that be diminished.
I hope not.
And I will also say that there are champions in Congress for engagement in the Balkans, and I think that will continue. I'd also, I heard Ms. Jovanovic talk today about the new administration's new approach. She seemed to imply it's all about doing business and the lowering of, and she welcomed the lowering of sanctions. I will also note that sanctions were not lowered until after Mr. Dodik repealed the legislation, the secessionist legislation, and stepped back. But now, she was very careful not to say that she supports secession, but Mr. Dodik is in town at the same time, running around saying he is with the former imprisoned governor of Illinois. I know that doesn't narrow it down because there's multiple on the paper, but Blagojevich. So what do you make of that? Is this good cop, bad cop? What's going on with that?
Well, without trying to cross any partisan lines, as a retired diplomat, if you watch the remarks made by a certain personage at the National Prayer Breakfast today, there was a combination of prepared remarks, which covered a broad spectrum on issues of faith-based issues, and there were also sort of off-the-cuff remarks, which had more of a partisan focus. In the Foreign Service, you get sort of used to when a person departs from their prepared remarks. I would say, and by the way, keeping in mind that there is the second election of 3 in a 12-month period for President of the Republika Srpska this Sunday, not to forgive some march towards conflict, which I've been assured is not the case, but rhetoric about separation, independence, other sorts of things like that is sort of out there. That is an unfortunate fact. That's not a practical, immediate path. But you also mentioned sanctions, and thank you for underlining the fact that they were only lifted after the laws were repealed and after Dodik stepped down as president of the RS. Sanctions are a broad topic of direct interest for this administration. I would also say, in my experience, and others may have different opinions of that, there was this constant battle between the State Department and OFAC at the Treasury Department about what sanctions were or were not. And I can say, without revealing any state secrets, that the diplomatic toolbox is critically empty. Or close to empty. You can have 19th century gestures like recalling ambassadors for consultations, or you can impose sanctions because you have to do something. Sanctions feel good. I mean, they had that great effect. They got Japan to stop, invading China in 1941, or not. But sanctions, let's do sanctions because sanctions are good because we have to do something. There are separate sanctions, not connected to OFAC, but for persons who are corrupt, for example. And a number of embassies in the region ran around in 2018 imposing sanctions as quickly as they could because somebody was rumored to be corrupt without, frankly, particular evidence. We have this now perverse situation where public officials are being prosecuted for corruption but are not on a sanctions list for being corrupt, and others who are reasonably prosperous business people whose work is transparent and pay taxes can't bring themselves or their families to the United States at all. So sanctions are a difficult topic. This is the first administration to say they are a diplomatic tool and to remove them, again, because of those positive steps, whereas trying to do that in the past, there are people who have been dead for more than 20 years who are still on sanctions lists because of the way they've been handled previously. So perhaps this is a precedent. It's certainly a different step. It's something for people in the region and elsewhere in the world to think about.
So, Ambassador Hill, maybe if we have just real quick, you were very involved in the Dayton Accords that ended the war and ethnic cleansing, the aim of which was to create a separate Serb state. What does it say about Dayton if, in fact, that is still on the table to create an ethnic Serb state carved out of Bosnia?
I'm sorry, the aim of Dayton?
The aim of Dayton was to end the war and ethnic cleansing, and now we're back talking about an ethnic Serb state as a real possibility.
I think there's always been, first of all, Dayton came about because some 200,000, many civilians were killed.
Yeah.
And once you have a civil war in your country, you should not get too critical of the international community, which comes in to try to stop the war. I mean, so I've heard many Bosnians complain about Dayton, but people from Bosnia, whether Serbs or Croats or Bosnians, they can complain about Dayton, but they should have given some thought to that before they started this hideous civil war. The purpose of Dayton, of course, was to try to find systems of governance that would work and things that everyone would agree to. And so it wasn't us imposing things on the parties. It was the parties saying, yeah, we used to do this in old Yugoslavia. We understand some of this turn taking, so that's okay with us. And so if they want to change it, and they were always welcome to change it, but you couldn't do it by aiming a gun at someone's head. You had to, maybe have, one party go to the other and say, hey, if you want to lower taxes, we want to lower taxes, and then we can jam the other guy. But we're not going to accept violence as the way to go forward. I think the international community got kind of more impatient with Dayton than even the people on the ground there. But I think a lot of what's going on is, there hasn't been any violence there for 30 years, and a lot of Bosnians, and we heard this from the Bosnian Serb representative today, saying, this sounds like colonialism to us. So I think you're going to see some changes there. The problem is that embedded in the whole process is tight coordination between the US and Europeans, and I'm kind of worried about where that's heading. Which is why I didn't talk about it earlier. But I really think there's going to be some real problems in terms of synchronizing. I mean, this is careful choreography to go into the PIC, these meetings that they have with all the coordination. So that said, I don't see a momentum for war in Bosnia. I do see a momentum for some changes, and I hope they can work those out.
Do we have time for audience questions, or are we cutting into the next session?
I have a quick.
No. Quick. Okay, go ahead. Quick.
You mentioned tools in the diplomatic toolbox about sanctions, and you were referring to State Department. So you were referring specifically to 7031C, which is a persona non grata. I have a very direct question for you, since you're not in the State Department anymore. Do you not feel that is a very cruel sanction? And the reason I'm saying this, it has no legal recourse. Once you've got it, it's for life. It's for all of your family, your wife, all of your children for life. And many people have been sanctioned with 7031C through the NGO community and others. So do you think it's time to get rid of it and then just have people declared persona non grata through consular at the embassies? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question, and very quickly, it was put together with the best intentions, like all of these things always are, but there is no waiver mechanism. There is no way to prove otherwise. One person accuses another person of being corrupt, and depending on whether the embassy staff agrees or not, they send in a message to Washington saying, put this person on the sanctions list, affecting all of their family members, including, toddlers, indefinitely, because again, there is no waiver. Sort of in a roundabout way, if you can prove that you're relevant to the United States at some point in the distant future, it might go away. I don't think that's actually ever happened. Well, I'm not surprised to hear that. It gives tremendous power for people to point fingers at each other and undercut any kind of hint of the rule of law. Again, there is at least one country, I won't mention it, but where a mayor and a deputy prime minister are both on trial. They've both been indicted, at least, for corruption. I don't know, perhaps they're on the 7031C list, but other people in that same country have been on that list for 7 or 8 years and have never been prosecuted by anybody. So there are clearly some disconnects there. I'm not saying sanctions don't serve a purpose, but in that particular instance, I think somebody needs to take a much more careful look.
I think the concern, of course, is that through that process, we interfere with the political process in a country. It's one thing to go after some known gangster and even if the known gangster has some political role. But we're looking in some countries like we decide who's a good guy and who's a bad guy. We're interfering with the internal process and distorting the internal process. And ultimately, we didn't understand. It's hard enough to understand your own politics, and then to go into some other country that you couldn't even spell the name of 2 weeks ago, and you're going to say this is how it's going to work. There's an arrogance to it that I think the world has kind of outgrown. I don't think they're going to put up with it, and I think we need to look very hard at this stuff.
All right. Well, that's we're past time, but everybody stay tuned. We are now on the final program is a spotlight conversation with Jakov Militovic, the president of Montenegro.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see such strong interest so late in the day after a half day of conversations here at our inaugural Balkans Forward Summit today. Strong showing of interest both in the room here at Atlantic Council headquarters and of course online. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jan Fleck. I'm the Senior Director of the Europe Center here at the Atlantic Council, Europe Center being the home to our Balkans Forward initiative here at the Atlantic Council. And I'm delighted to welcome you to our final session of this packed day, a keynote spotlight conversation with His Excellency Jakov Milatovic, President of Montenegro. President Milatovic, thank you for joining us here and welcome back to the Atlantic Council it is.
Well, thank you for having me, and it's always a great pleasure to be back here.
Great to have you. So we stand between our in-person audience and a reception in our Adrian Arch Sky Lobby. So we're going to make the next 25, 30 minutes, hopefully very dynamic, a very dynamic conversation. And so I want to dive right in. You've been in the US for the National Prayer Breakfast. Montenegro celebrates this year 20 years of diplomatic relations after regaining independence. And last year you also celebrated 120 years of diplomatic relations with the United States. And so at the outset, I wanted to ask you, we're well aware of a very dynamic situation in the relationship between the United States of Europe, between the United States and Europe, and there are questions around the U.S. role in the Western Balkans. What are your priorities? I saw you spoke to a number of members of the United States Congress as well on the sidelines of the prayer breakfast. What are your priorities here for the relationship with the United States, and how do you see the role of the United States in the Western Balkans?
Well, thank you very much. And, what I do want to say here and what I said to a number of people with whom I spoke today is not to lose the focus from the Balkans. I believe that's the key message that I transmitted to all my counterparts here in DC. I know that the world is a big place, and I know that there are many places throughout the world now that are complicated, complex, perhaps of more American interest than what the Balkans is. But the key message that I had today is not to lose the focus, and I believe this is very important. Coming back to the Balkans, I believe that the Balkans today is not, or let me put it otherwise, is a place more complicated than perhaps it was a few years ago from the political point of view. And I believe that in that regard, the role of United States is crucial for the stability and prosperity of the Western Balkans and of the Balkans in general. We can speak about the role of China in the Balkans, all major infrastructure projects that are currently being built by Chinese in the Balkans, the role of Russia in the Balkans, and obviously, aspiration of many of the Balkan countries of the Western Balkans to become the part of the EU. So this is all very much interlinked and connected. And, so this is to repeat again, the role of United States in the Western Balkans is crucial for the stability of the Western Balkans.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to come to the other key relationship. You already mentioned the aspirations of the region to join the European Union. Montenegro is obviously one of the, if not the front runner among the Western Balkan 6. 33 negotiation chapters overall, all open, 13 provisionally closed. Just last week you closed chapter 32 on financial controls. You've been very explicit in setting quite some ambitious timelines, closing all of the chapters, the negotiations by the end of this year. You've made 28 by 28, so 28 EU member states, Montenegro being the 28th by 2028, an ambition. Looking at this from at the beginning of this year, you know, how realistic do you see that? Are you setting yourself a stretch goal here? And what do you see as the main challenges in really getting there or even getting close?
It was actually myself who came up with the sentence. So when I became the president back in 2023, I came up with this ambitious target, but you know, I still believe a reachable one, that Montenegro becomes 28th member state of the EU by 2028. You know, the time has changed also in the EU, and I believe this is where the Russian war in Ukraine really played a major role, because Europe also understood that the enlargement is also about security of the European continent. And so now, you know, finally, after many years, we have two for tango. Not only the will of a candidate country to join the EU, but also a political will of the EU itself to accept new member states. And I believe that out of all 10 candidate countries, there is a fact that Montenegro now is a front runner. Montenegro is by far the smallest among all the Balkan countries and among all the candidate countries who are willing to join the EU. But what I believe Montenegro can play as an exemplary role, where also the EU could, through the example of Montenegro, send a very clear message to all the other candidate countries that enlargement is on, is alive, is happening. And this is where I believe the process has also become political. So it's not anymore everything about ticking the boxes and closing the chapters. And, you know, to be very frank, it was never the case when the enlargement was happening. Think of Greece, or think of even Spain and Portugal in the 80s. It was a decision of the European leaders to enlarge towards the south, because south of Europe back then was, you know, relatively unstable. And that was the way to bring not only stability and prosperity to southern European countries, but also to bring stability for Europe as a whole. And the same logic applied when, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when there was a political decision to enlarge towards the east. And it was never really about ticking the boxes. And I believe that European leaders forgot about that for a while until the Russian war in Ukraine happened. So once again, we are living, in a political process of enlargement. Whether Montenegro now is, fully ready, who is ever fully ready? Nobody. But whether now is a good time to deliver on this goal, I believe absolutely yes. And I'm, a major promoter of this idea in Montenegro and in a wider region. And this is where I genuinely believe that Montenegro really can play this role model for all the other countries. But having said that, I do want also to, make an important notion that in the minds of the people of Montenegro, we also believe that the stability and prosperity of the wider Balkan region is only in the EU. And for us, it is in our national interest that all the other countries from the region also join the EU as soon as possible.
You're hosting, to come back to that theme of a political process, you're hosting both the EU-Western Balkans summit, I think in June, and then later in the year also the Berlin process summit. Is that a calculated step to sort of make sure this stays a political process as well? To your point about the geopolitical motivations on the EU side behind this.
Absolutely, yes. And I have, kept asking for it over the last 2 years, and I got it. You cannot get it if you don't ask for it. So I remember the first time I attended there is a summit which is called European Political Community Summit. And the first one that I attended when I became the president was in June 2023 in the Republic of Moldova. And I was asking constantly that Montenegro should host, that summit. And eventually I got, the opportunity to be able to host the EU-Western Balkan Summit exactly at the moment when Montenegro is celebrating 20 years since we have regained our independence. And I believe it's a very symbolic message that in June, 20 years, exactly 20 years after we have regained our independence, we will be celebrating this moment with all European leaders in Montenegro, as well as with all the leaders from the neighborhood who will be coming in Montenegro. And I believe this is, in my opinion, the best possible way to present Montenegro as a future member of the EU, but also as a good neighbor. I believe that regional cooperation and being a good neighbor is just the other side of the coin of the European integration.
So Marta Koos, the EU Enlargement Commissioner, has called you the most prepared country. We've talked about this recognition as a front runner, but I want to switch a little bit to the challenges. Over the last few days, we've seen sort of a back and forth between you in your constitutional role and the parliament about 25 legislative items that the parliament passed as part of aligning with EU law and regulations. And you expressed some concerns over proclaiming these and making these law, these 25 proposals. And in your statements, I think yesterday, you also made clear some real areas where you see continued challenges if Montenegro is to stay on this ambitious path. Can you expand a little bit on those challenges, those areas that you still see as the most pressing ones?
Absolutely, because I believe that I'm a value-based politician who is really trying to make sure that we use the EU integration process to genuinely reform ourselves, not to use it as a PR thing. And many politicians do use it as a PR thing. For me, it's not a PR thing. It's an anchor, it's a roadmap to genuinely become a better society, to genuinely become a society where the rule of law exists in a full meaning of it, to become a genuinely reformed society from the perspective of the market economy, from the perspective of democratic development. So it was a bit of a political buzz because our parliament 2 days ago adopted 25 laws in half an hour, and without reading them. And I raised the question, okay, you're being paid for one thing, to read the laws, read the law. So that was my point, do your job. And I think that my role in our society is to be this kind of corrective factor, the one who is able to say the things that are right. And I know that they understand that. So there is a bit of a political dynamic, which I believe is a good one, because we are a democratic society. So I just want to make sure that from now on, the laws that the MPs are voting in the parliament are actually the laws that the MPs read and make sure that they are good for our society. That's the point. It's not really the point that you come in the parliament and raise the hand without reading the law. Because, you know, we can do that with AI now, right? We don't need people, you know, who are very well paid just to raise hands.
So you had those concerns, then you changed your mind and said, okay, we will in order to maintain the speed. What changed your opinion? I mean, you still seem to be concerned about the role, the you know, oversight and legislative scrutiny that the parliament didn't really perform, in your opinion.
Now, because I realized that, you know, even if I return the laws back to the parliament, the MPs will still not read them. So, you know, I then just, you know, said, okay, you know, what's the point of, you know, of postponing the process? I'm just gonna, you know, proclaim the laws. But you know, the whole thing was from the very beginning just to make a public point that everybody in the government, in the parliament, myself as a president, we all have a role to play. And we are all paid by citizens to do our job. That's it. It's as easy as that. Can you imagine, you know, going to see a doctor, ask him, you know, for an opinion, and the doctor gives you an opinion on, you know, on your condition without even, you know, checking your condition, right? It's a very similar situation. So this is why I wanted to make sure that from now on, all the laws are being read. Otherwise, we generally don't really need a parliament. You know, as I said, we can do it, you know, through the AI or by picking, you know, 81 random people from the street to do the job instead of the MPs who are, you know, being paid for doing the job. Maybe you know, maybe I'm too cruel, but you know, I genuinely think that I'm speaking the truth.
What's an important point about, you know, political culture of an aspiring EU candidate as well? I think that point is well taken. Let me ask you one more question that's related.
Because sorry to interrupt, you know, and my cabinet members ask me, you know, President, why are you making the point? And I said, you know, look, if this is the case, then why don't we adopt 1,000 laws immediately within an hour, if that's the point? But that's not the point, right? So the point is to read the law before, you know, voting for it.
So last question related to this specifically is, or I should say adjacently, the European Commission's last report on progress for Montenegro highlighted the risk of sort of political stability, instability, of gridlock, and the role of Parliament, you know, performing its role. We just saw one of the coalition parties in this rather large government coalition leave. We've seen sort of the return of some ethnic debates and language debates. There's continued speculation about your relationship and the Prime Minister's relationship. There's this gridlock over the Constitutional Court. I could go on a little bit. Are you at all concerned about Montenegro maybe tripping itself up on the home stretch with these ambitious goals domestically? And what do you recommend to avoid that, to ensure that does not happen in a very tense domestic dynamic?
I think the geopolitical moment is as such that, you know, if we don't start a war in Montenegro, we would, you know, get in the EU by 2028. You know, so, and I think this is understood well by many of the politicians in Montenegro, and this is why they're using it. to do many things that are genuinely not within the European standards. Once again, and this is a scenario that I have also elaborated in front of students of the University of Montenegro. There are basically, in this relationship between the EU and the candidate country, there are 4 scenarios, depending on 2 factors that are, key factors for the accession. Those are political will of the European Union to have the country in. That's crucial. And the second factor is the political will of the candidate country to reform itself enough to get in, to be allowed to get in, right? Because, you need to achieve certain standards. And depending on those 2 factors, you have 4 scenarios. The first one is a scenario where, the EU really doesn't have a political will to get the candidate country in. Neither the candidate country is generally interested to go in. I'm not going to name the names, but there is a big country which is still a candidate country, which is part of the scenario. The second scenario is the one where the country really, the candidate country really does something, pursues a reform agenda, but the EU doesn't really have a political will to have the country in. And just to remind you, North Macedonia was part of this story. You remember it was the country that even changed its name, not to mention constitution, many times. And the EU just didn't really do much about it. The third scenario is the one where, the EU has a political will, but the candidate country doesn't really use the process to structurally change itself. I believe that's a bad scenario in the long run, because even if the country gets in, it's not a credible and sustainable member of the Union. So, and this is the scenario where some of the politicians are counting for. This is when I talk about the PR and, using, when you want something to be passed in the parliament, you just say, oh, European Union has already green-lighted it. Nobody knows, by the way, what's happening, because, it's a complicated bureaucratic process. And the fourth scenario is the one that I'm, really promoting, advocating, and politically fighting for. That's the one where the EU has a political will, but also the country uses the EU integration as an anchor for its own developmental roadmap. And that's the one that I'm looking for also for Montenegro.
That's a great segue to my last 2 questions. One, on the economy. You are an Oxford-trained economist. You worked for the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development on Southeastern Europe. You were an economy minister before running for president and then coming into your current office. What do you see as the main priorities for Montenegro's economic agenda moving forward? You already mentioned some bad experiences with Chinese investments that I think are very well known. There's obviously a heavy concentration on tourism in Montenegro. What do you see as the main priorities as you also converge with the EU's economy?
Well, I believe that the convergence should be faster. This is where obviously economic policies should be better. I'm, currently relatively unhappy with the convergence, vis-a-vis the EU average. I think that the potential for Montenegrin annual growth is, 5 to 6%, and this is what the target of the government should be. By the way, we, again ended up with the Chinese being selected to construct a major highway in Montenegro. So let's see how how that will evolve. But definitely, we need to diversify away from tourism, and to do something about it, not only to speak about it. Number one. Number two is energy production. It's a huge potential for Montenegro. Montenegro is already exporter of energy, and we are the only Balkan country that has a connection with Italy. So most of the trade which is happening between the Balkans and Italy actually goes through Montenegro. So that's huge potential. And the third one is, to get in the EU as soon as possible in order to be able to use some of the structural funds in order to make our infrastructure, especially roads and municipal infrastructure, better for our economy to be able to flourish even more. So those are three key, obviously this is a very complicated question, but given the fact that I have 30 seconds to answer it, this is my answer.
I was asking for big priorities, so you already alluded to the fact that we've run out of time, unfortunately, but it was a very good conversation. Thank you for giving us that strategic overview and addressing some of the more challenging elements too. I think it's a great wrap-up and closing session, so to speak, for our Balkans Forward Summit today. Really appreciate you coming back to the Council. You have an open invitation. Come back again. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to everyone online and certainly here in the room. Those in person, you're invited to our closing reception now in the Adrian Arch Sky Lobby just outside the forum rooms here again. Continue to follow the Atlantic Council Europe Center and our Balkans Forward initiative, please, for all things Western Balkans, and we hope to see you at the EU Western Balkans Summit on the sidelines somewhere with some Atlantic Council programming as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Looking forward. Thank you very much as well.